Our planet faces many challenges, but arguably the biggest, a challenge of civilizational dimensions, is climate change. Human activities have so altered the Earth's atmospheric composition that the climate itself is changing. Scientists have coined a new term for this age. They call it the Anthropocene, because human interference with planetary systems is beginning to affect the very life support systems that we depend upon. They warn that we may be the last generation to live in an age of climate stability, and that we are now entering an era outside of human experience. NASA's James Hansen, the man who first broke the warnings about global warming in 1988, put it this way recently: "We are on the precipice of climate system tipping points beyond which there is no redemption." Across the world, we're seeing rising temperature and extreme weather events. Man-made greenhouse gas emissions over the past 150 years have made our planet much warmer and disturbingly volatile. The 1990s were the warmest decade on record. 1998 was the warmest year ever. It was also the year of exceptionally wild weather, when rainforests received no rain, and when East Africa experienced its worst floods in half a century in the dry season. 2007 too has been a year of wild weather. We've had heat waves, floods and storms, the likes of which we haven't seen in generations. What does this mean for India? How must we as a responsible nation respond? As a tropical country with a long coastline, India is particularly sensitive to climate change. As a poor nation, we also have less adaptive capacity than many. The majority of our vast rural population is also dependent on the most climate-sensitive sectors, agriculture, fisheries, and forests, for their livelihoods. 4 climate hotspots from our country demonstrate how climate change is beginning to affect our people, our economy, and our biodiversity. 4 locations, from the mountains to the sea, 4 stories from the Orissa coastline to the mangrove forests in the Bay of Bengal, from Himalayan apple orchards in Himachal to the snowbound peaks of Ladakh in the far north. In 1998, the Central American country of Honduras experienced Hurricane Mitch. It was the worst hurricane to hit the Americas in 200 years. It destroyed 60% of the country's bridges, almost a quarter of its schools, and half of its agricultural productivity, including all of its banana plantations. Hurricane Mitch set back Honduras's development by decades. In India, we have had our own Hurricane Mitch. It was called a super cyclone and hit Orissa in 1999. The 7,500-kilometer long Indian coastline includes at its eastern end some 500 kilometers in Orissa alone on the Bay of Bengal. This region has long been prone to natural disasters. But the supercyclone of 1999 was different. It came at the tail end of a series of natural disasters that had ravaged Orissa in the 1990s, the warmest decade on record. The cyclone brought terror and destruction in its wake, killing 30,000 people, displacing hundreds of thousands, destroying countless cattle and livestock, and washing away years of Orissa's hard-won GDP. Climate change projections for India project more intense cyclonic activity in the Bay of Bengal. The supercyclone is merely the face of things to come. Orissa is now also having to contend with another impact: sea level rise. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, tells us that the sea level in the Bay of Bengal is rising at a rate of 1 millimeter every year. India's National Institute of Oceanography corroborates this. Rising sea level has also meant the ingress of the sea into the land, Older survey maps clearly indicate that Orissa has already lost 425 acres of coastal land to the sea. The village cluster of Sattabhaya tells the same story, but in human terms. Of its original 7 hamlets, only 2 remain. The rest have been washed away by the sea, as it has encroached 3 kilometers inland. The seawater has rendered much of the arable land saline and sterile. It may take decades for it to be cultivable again. Famine is a persistent spectre looming over Sattabhaya. While the young men migrate to the cities in large numbers, the brides of Sattabhaya find it hard to find a groom because they are seen as ill-starred and luckless by their neighbors. For the locals, the issue of whether the destruction of villages like Sattabhaya is due directly to climate change or not is of little consequence. They understand the science well enough, and, more importantly, its clear consequences for low-lying areas such as their own as the seas begin to warm.
क्रमश बाली पुति पकेला तेणु माने स्थलभाग होगा तेणु रही ये जमी था सातभाई ये अनेक समस्या साइक्लोन खाइका ये उठे ये बाउंड्री बाद 3 किलोमीटर दूर था राजाघर से राजाघर कोठा सीधा सब गाँ गुड़ा था 2 माइल कि 3 किलोमीटर ऊर्ध हम खाई आसले सब.
If you analyze the number of storms that has hit Orissa coastline in India in the last about 100 years, 422 was in Orissa itself. So I think that shows it is a favorable, sort of a location where the storms forming in the bay, there is a more tendency of hitting Orissa coast.
This change in the number of post-monsoon low pressure areas forming in the Bay of Bengal, it is certainly due to the rise in sea surface temperature.
The extent of ingress by the sea is indicated by the tube well. Once in the center of the village, it is a reminder of all that has already been lost. Rice mills, schools, homes, families, even fortunes. The ebb of the tide sometimes reveals poignant reminders.
Regions are protected by mangroves, or if they have coral reefs off the shore, then those natural habitats reduce the wave energy that you have, and that prevents damage inland. It reduces the extent of flooding inland, and so protects the livelihoods of people. So there's a very good reason for people to actually preserve their natural habitats in the coastal zone, their mangroves, and to do their best to conserve their coral reefs, because in the tropical regions, those are natural defense mechanisms which will potentially reduce the extent of flooding.
Even the mangrove forests along the coastline, nature's own defense from the sea, have disappeared, hacked down due to greed or necessity. With them has gone the last hope of saving communities such as Sattabhaya. India's long coastline renders us particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Storm surges and sea level rise are of particular threat for the continuing viability of our coastal communities and for the security of our economic and other infrastructure. The Sundarbans is a case in point. Located in the Bay of Bengal and home to the Royal Bengal tiger, the Sundarbans are also home to thriving fishing communities. For centuries in these forests, as elsewhere in India, animals and humans have coexisted. Their fates remain intertwined today as they face their greatest challenge, climate change. The river Ganga meets the Bay of Bengal in a maze of rivulets and islands, forming the world's largest mangrove delta. This is the Sundarbans. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1984, the southernmost borders of India and Bangladesh run along this region. Its ecological fragility and the dangers it faces today are a matter of mounting concern. Already, 19,000 acres of forest land has been submerged. 4 islands have been submerged in 30 years by rising waters. Salinity has increased dramatically in rivers and aquifers. Experts believe there is enough scientific evidence to link this to climate change, which is raising sea levels dangerously high in the Bay of Bengal. The Sundarbans, which means beautiful forest in the local language, is home to the Sundari tree, known botanically as Heritaria faunus, amongst the most important of the other surviving mangrove species. In addition to the Royal Bengal tiger, the Sundarbans has an extraordinary wealth of flora and fauna. The wild boar, the barking and spotted deer, 226 species of birds, and over 20 species of snakes have their natural habitat here. All are threatened, along with the Sundari tree itself, by increased salinity and rising sea levels. Added to this is the economic pressure that leads to the regular felling of Sundari trees by the local population, often left with few options but to chop down their remaining natural resources. For these communities, fishing is their major source of livelihood. The Sundari trees provide vital ecosystem functions here too, with nutrients from their leaves feeding fish larvae in the waters below. But along with the entire aquatic ecosystem, fishing is under threat, in particular of the commercially attractive tiger prawn seedling sector, whose collection alone involves 4 million people. Tectonic shifts have also affected the bottom of the sea in the Sundarbans, with the unique forest cover increasingly migrating towards Bangladesh. The future of many islands in the Sundarbans is uncertain. The 4 islands of Kapashgori, Bedford, Suparibhanga and Lohachara are already submerged. Smaller islands like Bhangadwari and Ghoramara are losing 20 hectares of land every year. For the larger Sagar Islands, this figure is 45 hectares. The Sundarbans have recorded a sea level rise of 3.14 millimeters, dangerously higher than the world average of 2 millimeters. By 2060, 15% of the Sundarbans will probably be lost, along with 17% of Bangladesh. But sea level rise is one of the most dynamic areas of climate science, and new discoveries of the more rapid melting of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets than expected could bring such estimates far forward. Sea level rise, coastal erosion and the destruction of the mangroves, the greatest protection against the effects of cyclones in the Bay of Bengal, are not just of concern to the rural hinterland, but to major urban centres such as Kolkata. Here the mangroves perform a special function for the city, filtering the dangerous sewage and heavy metals from Kolkata and its industrial suburbs. With their destruction, this biofiltration function, which saves the city crores of rupees, will be lost. The economic contribution of the Sundarbans, in terms of food, fisheries and tourism, to West Bengal is also considerable. The changes that we are seeing here should give the state's policymakers strong reasons for concern. These changes have also given rise to a new human phenomenon, the emergence of the ecological refugee. As more and more people lose their lands and livelihoods, they are voting with their feet and moving towards cities such as Kolkata, adding to the already intense urban pressures there. From the coasts to the mountains, across the subcontinent we are beginning to see changes that are consistent with what we understand climate change to mean for India. One of the main areas of concern is the projected impact of climate change on our water supply and on our food security. In a country that is already facing agricultural deceleration, which is causing graver hardship and suffering for people around the country, the projected impacts of agricultural productivity decline should cause us all concern. The next story takes us to Himachal, where we see how a combination of warmer temperatures and a retreating snowline are beginning to create havoc with a once famous economic success story. Himachal Pradesh, tucked away in the foothills of the western Himalayas, is on the northern fringes of the Indian subcontinent. Its gentle slopes are crowned by snow-capped peaks, which feed the 2 rivers, Chenab and Sutlej, which make agriculture viable and also the primary source of livelihood for the region's people. Apple cultivation was introduced here in the 1950s. Its success within India and abroad has spurred development and created a network of roads that crisscross the hills, linking major fruit processing units and flourishing markets. This has created a thriving economy at different levels of apple cultivation, from the careful growing of the orchards to trading, from fruit processing to transportation. It has created significant employment. It attracts a large migrant workforce from impoverished villages in neighbouring Nepal. Apples have spelt success for the hill slopes and valleys of Himachal, and the village of Kurla in Kulu district displays the prosperity that it has ushered in. Located within the apple-growing heights from 1,000 to 1,900 metres up to Manali, it has reaped the benefit over 4 decades. But climate change has emerged as a major threat to the green valleys and hill slopes of Himachal. Rising temperatures and receding snow lines have forced apple growers to plant their orchards ever higher into the colder climes that begin at 1,200 to 3,000 metres up to Lahore. Instead, the apple growers have been forced to take up other crops, including vegetables such as tomatoes and cauliflowers. Desperate efforts to grow other fruits such as peaches and plums have not been as successful. Agricultural scientists at the Indian Council of Agricultural Research are worried by the regular observation of rising temperatures and changing weather patterns. Kulu's usual temperatures, ranging from -2 degrees Celsius in winter to 25 degrees in summer, are no longer in evidence. Alarm scientists have recorded up to a staggering 44 degrees Celsius during unusually hot summers.
Maximum temperature I have seen here, it goes up to 34 degrees centigrade. And minimum is -2, -3. But certainly if the congenial atmosphere is not there, pollen will lose its viability. So we have seen in certain years crop failure also. So we were thinking reasons for one or the other thing, maybe the fact that some micronutrients deficiency are there. Next year we found that the crop is normal, and we have correlated these things with the temperature.
The rising mercury makes seed production for apples far more difficult today, and the sudden increase of insect pests spells greater disaster both for the present and the future. Relocating the apple orchards from the more hospitable heights of the Kullu hills has not been easy. The climb of the apple growers to higher reaches has meant that alpine forests have had to be cleared to make way for apple orchards. This has not yet spelled ecological disaster though, because some of the alpine forests were man-made and belong to a much later date. Topsoil conditions have not yet been threatened, since apple and plum trees are more effective in preventing soil erosion than coniferous trees. But what will happen if the temperatures keep rising? This is what worries farmers, agricultural scientists and development agencies in Himachal. An uncertain future awaits Himachal's mountain villages. In Kurla today, there is only one apple tree left standing, a canary in the Himalayan coal mine, a mute witness to the impacts that have already left their mark. The rapid melting of glaciers and ice sheets around the world is one of the clearest manifestations of climate change. In India, we haven't been immune. While our average temperature rise of the landmass in India has been 0.5 degrees centigrade, in the Himalayas it's been a whole degree centigrade. Our glaciers are the source of our water, the source of life. The next story tells of one man's struggle to keep the water flowing and keep his community alive. Ladakh, the far northern reaches of India, where snow-capped peaks reign in the majestic heights. Mighty mountains and magnificent glaciers have made this the land of our myths and legends. The Hindus believe that their holy river Ganga emerges from the locks of the Lord Shiva, who resides in these Himalayan heights. The myth has a kernel of truth in it, as it is the glaciers that are the only perennial source of water, not only for the Ganga, but for all the major rivers of northern India. Climate change has struck at this trans-Himalayan storehouse of water. The glaciers are melting at a rapid rate, and snow lines continue to rise.
Although it's difficult to say what will happen to precipitation in India, and of course for India precipitation is crucially important, all of them agree that over the next 50 years there's likely to be a temperature change of the order of, say, 1.5 degrees Celsius, temperature increase. Now, if that succeeds in raising the snow line by, let's say, 150 meters, which is very likely, that will have a major impact on Himalayan glaciers.
Chebang Norfel is an unusual fighter in this remote region. Driven by the need to secure water in this ironically water-scarce area, he has used his ingenuity to create artificial glaciers by slowing down snow-melted water. He has built retaining walls that prevent the meltdown of 5 icy streams to create water sources for the survival of 5 villages here. As winters become shorter and the snow line continues to climb, Chebang Norfel and his colleagues keep at the Herculean task of diverting glacial streams towards the shadow areas of these icy slopes, protecting them from the sun. Recent records show alarming results of temperature rise. The mercury that recorded the average minus 15 degrees Celsius in January 2002 dropped to minus 12 degrees in January 2003, and a year later, in January, it showed minus 10 degrees. Such unnerving and regular increase of temperature year on year is a harbinger of things to come in the not-so-distant future. The snow line has already registered a rise of 100 meters. Even a 1.5 degree temperature increase in 50 years could spell disaster, not only for far-off Ladakh, but for the entire northern parts of the Indian subcontinent. Rivers such as the Ganga, Indus and Brahmaputra, all glacier-fed rivers, are predicted to become seasonal rather than perennial. The implications for a country where agriculture forms 27% of the GDP and employs the largest number of people should concern policymakers. Chebang Norfel, whose neighbors call him the Iceman, continues undeterred. His struggle forces him to travel to more inhospitable locations like the mountain pass at Jangla, with the world's highest motorable road at 17,400 feet. Nature provides its own indicator of the crisis in Ladakh. These migratory birds traditionally left the harsh winters for warmer climes, but today many of them are staying put and becoming permanent residents. The human impact of these changes is becoming dramatically visible. Earlier this year, a group of Ladakhi villagers was cut off from their mountain village by a river that had surprisingly melted much before its time. Normally, they would just have walked across the frozen river at this time, but the warmer weather had melted it far earlier than normal, making it unpassable. Stranded, they would have missed the sowing season, unable to return till the following year. Luckily, the authorities came to the rescue and airlifted them back to their village. This time, it was a crisis averted, but a sign of things to come.
मुश्किल जे छेनुक जवान जे मैंने डुलांग यानो पार्तुला दारबो गफला ड्रोल छेनुले तादसन मिंगो ए गुपचू कोंगा कोरुची खादे यो दिकाले ngacha khangbe lasi mokabing sare nokju dena ngacha las sula dika lambula tharma tar muskil sombasana ngati lam cho las cho chesiang moka metkan soaka thu chingire mane yodang medano ama thu de mane dioni chichen yuratonina lutwena ya ramarigu astena chichen chang de samjato muskil yo de nole.
The 5 villages of Chebang Norfel's area survive, just on the 5 artificial glaciers he has created. For now, they can grow their own food. But for how much longer? Chebang Norfel's world is a microcosm of the predicted changes that climate change will bring to mountain communities like his across the world. The effects of Himalayan glacier melt will be felt not only in Ladakh, but in communities across the country and the region. Water supply and agricultural production will be fundamentally affected. first by floods as the glaciers melt, and then by drought as the snow-fed rivers dry. When that happens, acts of individual human heroism, such as Chevang Norfel's, may not be enough. It is projected that Himalayan glaciers will be virtually gone in 4 decades. In their wake will come first floods, and then a water supply crisis, the likes of which we have never seen before. These are not alarmist projections. These are the sober conclusions of glaciologists and climate scientists who have studied the facts. The 4 stories that we have seen from India's climate hotspots are not conclusive evidence of climate change. No single event can be. But they are indicative of broad trends that are being witnessed across the world that we must take note of. The IPCC, in its latest report on dangerous climate change, confirmed that climate change is happening, but more importantly, that it's happening faster than we thought before. Economic analyses such as the Stern report tell us that acting now is far better than acting in the future. But with that danger, there is also opportunity, an opportunity to adopt much greener growth patterns, to provide jobs and shelter and housing to our people in a far more sustainable way that does not cost the earth. The technology is there, the economics are persuasive, but can we get the politics right? If we are indeed to be the last generation to enjoy a stable climate, we must get it right. Adjusting with hope to a climate-constrained future may be the best legacy we can leave our children.
The interesting point is that the level of carbon dioxide and methane at this point today in this is unprecedented in the last almost 1 million years. This is the record from Antarctic ice cores, which shows you that never in the last 650,000 years the level of carbon dioxide was not more than 280 parts per million. But now it is about 380 parts per million, so unprecedented.
Professor Goswami, thank you very much for that extremely informative introduction, which has provided a very helpful context for the films that you're going to see this afternoon and for the discussion that we'll be having. I want to recognize the work and the partnership that we've already undertaken with IITM, with Professor Goswami and Dr. Shiralkar. And I hope that we'll have much more exchange, because with the scientific community in India, we don't have to preach to the converted. We don't have to explain the science of climate change because already our scientific community is in the vanguard. And in the end, as you well know, Dr. Rajendra Pachori has been the chair of the IPCC for many years, and we have some of the leading contributors to climate science, I'm sure notably also in this room. What we are seeking to do, however, with the event today, this afternoon, of which this is a part, is launch a major national awareness-raising and a mobilization campaign around climate change and its implications for our future.
Basic problem is that we don't know how in the next 100 years human beings are going to behave. This is one of the most difficult things to model. At the same time, many processes are non-linear, like the temperature of Leh going up by 2.5 degrees a year cannot be extended over the next 100 years. It will be something like 250 plus or something like that. So we just was Pune last week. This is the weather office which was flooded. But this is not climate change. Let's remember that. So this is something that we have to accept as the realities of life. Again, the impacts of climate change are not uniform. They're different over the oceans and the land. And the positive side is that everybody is talking about.
Whether the super cyclone that it depicted was a scientific event, was due to global warming or not, I think Dr. Kedkar has answered that it was not. Second film was about Sundarbans and water level rise. Yes, it is one of the causes. But tell about the population growth in India. For example, we go on talking about everything else but the population growth. In none of the films I heard a single reference to the population growth in the world. It is a micro scale as compared to the glaciers that we have in Himalayas. Are we in a position to repeat these experiments anywhere? Yes, it can certainly solve problems of those 5 or 6 villages that have come up as far as the water supply, drinking water supply is concerned. The global warming that is being taken place, as was shown by Dr. Goswami here, is largely because of carbon dioxide, 60%. Or more than 60% if I recollect your figures, and 40% or less than 40% because of CH4, methane and nitrous oxide. What are we going to do to solve the problems of this growth in population is the first question we should answer, and then talk of the global climate change and what we should do about agriculture.
The reason that we are here is to hear about what people think about these films, yes, but it's not just the films are just an illustration. So let me begin with that, the motivation of the films. This is not a UK government organized event. We are not a UK government funded body, non-governmental organization. We are all Indian citizens. We care about our country. We're concerned about the lack of leadership we show on an issue which we believe is a major civilizational threat facing our life.
Before more than 20 years, I was reading related with global cooling. Now this is global warming. So global cooling and global warming, these are the cycles which I come to know as per my knowledge, that these are the natural cycles, and after some years we may discuss over here about global cooling, maybe.
Satya said because of population growth, the problem has arisen. I think personally, let the population grow, but we should not clear land and remove trees from it. The real culprit is clearing of the land. We do not emit carbon dioxide, so we don't cause any harm to the nature.
How the green gas emission of each country is measured? You just shown in your slide that India is producing 1128 million tons and all that. Or is it an international pressure? And second question to madam is that you just told China is a proactive, but how this motorized way from Tibet side for Olympics they are creating?
We have had natural and man-made disasters. Natural disasters may have been the wrath of gods, which we could not control.
As far as India is concerned, it is not that we have not taken any action against that. One of the points was salinity of the water in that Sundarbans. Actually in Gujarat, we had carried out the jobs where the sea water has been stopped to go inside the rivers and make the water saline.
India is continuing to make measurements for several years now. Basically, how you do it is you identify the sources of emissions. If you have an idea about what are the sources and you know how much is burnt, then you can make an estimate of, these are called inventories. So inventories, a good deal of inventory work has been done in the last several years by several organizations in the country. It is not exhaustive, however. It needs more work, and that is why more work is going on. Also, you need a continuous measurement of carbon dioxide, methane at certain locations so that their variability is also recorded and how they are changing. So that is also some effort is going on. One station at Leh, Ladakh has been set up where continuous measurement is now going on at a pristine size. There are also other stations at Pondicherry and other places where these carbon dioxide measurements are continuously going on. Even in my institute, we are going lower level. So that is local. But you want to know what is the local source and what is the global background. So all these things are going on. But the inventory, based on the inventory, these numbers have come out. And these inventories are not absolute, but I think it is pretty close. Who is responsible? And whether, I think for this receding of the Himalayas is associated with the increase in the temperature. Increase in the temperature is associated with greenhouse gases quantity. And there, globally, everybody is responsible. So what can be done? And can we do something? I think we can do something. Everybody can do something. As I mentioned, we have to cut down we have to find a strategy where without hampering the growth, you reduce energy consumption.
I want to reply on the question that you asked, sir, about proactiveness, and leadership, about China. Now, there are governments who are in climate denial, as I would characterize it, and then there are governments who are in climate reality, The Chinese government in the last 8 to 10 years in particular has moved into the second category. It's a government which has become extremely serious about the political and the economic implications of climate change for it as a country. There are a number of factors why it's very, very concerned. Now, and I'll just give you a few illustrations here. One of the reasons is because it has been suffering an unprecedentedly long drought in the northwest of the country. Its capital city has been affected by that, Beijing. Beijing's water table is receding on the average by about 1 meter every year. And you know how much construction there's been in that city. The water scarcity issue, the water security issue, and desertification, the fact that Beijing now is subject to almost on a multiple times a year basis, sandstorms, which is making the city uninhabitable. So there are real concerns about the viability of Beijing as a capital city and all of the implications that that has for the governance, the political economy, the economy of the country. The other reason, of course, is agricultural productivity. Only 17% of the whole of the Chinese landmass has arable land. And according to the study that I mentioned to you earlier, which was produced by 80 of the most prominent scientists in China at the end of 2006 it was released. They say that they are going to suffer anything between 5 to 15% productivity losses in agriculture from now until 2020, I think it is, or 2030. So they already have national contingency strategies for how to deal with the various different dimensions of climate change that they're very concerned about. Now, the other issue that they're concerned about is sea level rise. Much of the population in China, most of the 1 billion people, are actually not in the hinterlands, they're on the coasts. Shanghai is a city with 40 million people. It's a city now which has become the heartbeat, effectively. The global economic center of gravity is moving to Shanghai and that part of the world. And yet Shanghai is a city which is tremendously at risk of sea level rise.
There was a question about how the greenhouse gases are correlated the fossil fuel consumption of each country, largely, because that is the main cause for greenhouse gas emissions, that is carbon dioxide, mainly carbon dioxide I'm talking of. If you take US, the figures are more than 7,100, China 5,000, Russia 2,000, India 1,900, and Japan about 1,400 million tons. This is 2004 year figures. But if you take per capita emissions of these countries, India is lowest, and that will be surprising because naturally about the population. India's per capita contribution of GHG emissions is 2 tons, China comes next 4 tons, Japan comes next with 11 tons, Russia comes with 14 tons, and US with 24 tons. Now you know where the shoe is pinching, and that is where we had to go ahead with curtailing those greenhouse gas emissions per capita. You are not in a position to wish away the population pressures. Population is going to grow. But what is important is go for non-conventional energy sources, which don't produce greenhouse gas emissions.
When Galileo found that the earth was round, and when Copernicus found that the sun was not moving around the earth but the other way around, he didn't ask the Pope, what should I say? When Newton had his apple falling on his head, he didn't ask Charles II, what should I tell of gravitation? These days, the scientists ask everybody, what should I say? This is causing all the problem. They should say what it is and tell us what is science and what is politics. We will separate out. That's all that I would like to tell.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that means it's a wrap. Thank you very, very much for your attention. My apologies to those of you who weren't able to get your comments into us. Please, however, stay in touch with us. You can reach us through our website or csmworld.org, or please send us a message at info@csmworld if you have any thoughts, suggestions as to how we can take this conversation further. We hope to be back in September in Pune and to be working with your city government and many of you on this agenda. Thank you very much.
whatever we have seen is directly or indirectly, it is due to the climate change. We must agree to that. Sort of a warning to all of us. Why the globe is affecting so bad? Why the God is so bad to us? It's not that God is not appearing here, but we ourselves, the human beings, we have made it. Let us accept it. How we have made it, we know it. But why we are ignorant about it? Why are you cutting the forest? Why are you, emitting carbon dioxide, all other toxic gases in the air? Why are you polluting the water? Why are you polluting the soil? We know it. But why, at the same time, why can't we control ourselves? If you see the history of Bombay, 7 islands, where are the 7 islands? There is no island at all. Why the flood is affected? Because we have changed the entire land use pattern of Bombay city. Let us agree to that. Botanists are not finding the mangrove species in Bombay city. Even the botany people, the biology people, they have to collect all the species of mangrove near Bombay coast. Today, nothing is available because there is nothing. You cut the mangrove, fill it with the garbage and make a building. That's what it is. The water from the glacier, from the top coming down, and the ocean is rising because of that. So naturally there is a increase of temperature at the top. So this is the condition today. This is who has done it. We have done it. And we have realized that this is whatever affected, it is due to, because of us. But why can't we act? On behalf of CII, I would say, I'm going to put it to my committee that at least my industry brothers should take care of whatever the waste they are generating. They should treat themselves. They have to be proactive. They should plant some more trees. Whatever the carbon dioxide is generated, at least they should make an arrangement to absorb the carbon dioxide by making more green coverage.
The victims of global warming are the least advantaged, the least able to resist and most traumatized by this. I think they also showed, perhaps through their absence, the lack of official intervention and any kind of help. And what I'm struck by is the lack of public debate and leadership from industry, from business, from commerce, and so forth, and indeed ultimately from government. I offer, in contrast, what passes for public debate in China, and admittedly it's not very wide, but under the circumstances there, when senior public officials stand up and speak, you know that at least this is reaching certain high levels of governance. And this week we heard the mayor of Shenzhen, in the very buoyant southern part of the country, it's enjoying spectacular growth, saying that that he's rather urging the people of that city not to buy a car. That's a form of leadership. I'm unsure how it will filter through, but I offer those as examples of something that I don't sense is happening in this country.
I'll talk about a power plant which Tata Power is planning to build in Mundra. It's called an ultra mega power plant. It's going to use a supercritical technology. These are a lot of big words. The whole idea is the thermal efficiency is something of the order of 43%, 44%, correct me if I'm wrong, as against 32 or 33% of regular power plants, such as Trombay. What we can do at our own level is energy conservation, and that will help tremendously. The fact that we are growing at 11 or 12% of energy consumption clearly shows that there is at least 2 or 3% waste there, and if we could throttle that down, it will help tremendously in terms of reducing the increase of CO2.
I agree with all that you said. My experience of covering and writing about industry here is that actually I hold Tata Group to be an exception to most things. The second point is that our collective point about the Chinese leadership was not necessarily to make a comparison between the models, but simply that important people are speaking. And of course, we wouldn't be so naive as to suggest that India's model be compared unfavorably with China's at all. It's merely to illustrate that someone has been kicked up the backside in China to stand up and speak.
We have to act locally, that's it. For a global this thing, we have to act locally, then only it will work. There is no need of comparing other country or other state, because we have to act very much locally. That's what I always believe in that.
Okay, if I might, I think part of my job as chair is also to shake things up a little. Before we get into a very comfortable position that countries like China don't have any bearing on India, I'd like to suggest they do. I'd like to suggest that globally, countries like China have stolen a march on India developmentally in terms of the technology that they're using for their infrastructure. We already see global positioning systems which are used in building construction in China. I know of none of that application of technology in Indian infrastructure. I think if we're looking at climate change as a major competitive challenge and a competitiveness opportunity for India, that we have to be a lot more alive to the challenge that this poses for our use of energy, for the state of our infrastructure and how we're going about making massive investments in public and private infrastructure. And really to challenge even you, the gentleman from Tata Power. Presumably this is a coal-fired power plant. India is online right now to produce 200 coal-fired power plants. Admittedly, China is online to produce 500 more, but they also receive 10 times more foreign investment than we do. Now, our challenge as both countries, being countries which are entirely reliant, virtually 70 to 80% of our fuel is dirty coal. China has made quite considerable investments in clean coal technology. Now, if you're still looking at the model of a coal-fired power plant, that tells me that the government is not sending sufficient signals to industry that we need to move away from that technology and develop new ones, which you're working on the efficiency angle, but it still means we're going to be taking more coal out of the ground.
Prashant Kokil, I am head environment. If we take it really seriously and do it, it is going to help a lot. Not that we are not having any initiatives at our end. Corporate charter on environment protection, I think CII is driving that, and many houses voluntarily are taking up environmental initiatives. It is there for 18 industries together, separately categorized, whatever we want to do. India basically is a frugal country. We are not very energy intensive in any field of activity. Now, do you still want to reduce further to accommodate somebody who is very much highly energy intensive, using 5 to 10 times more per capita? We'll have to think of some kind of a balance. Anyway, you are going to produce CO2, this way or that way. Because all these technologies add on to cost. Who is going to pay for that? Can we afford that?
China, of which you seem to be rather fond of in terms of their technological developments and commitments, let's talk about that. They are on track to emit more CO2 than the United States in another year. Now let's think that through for a second. Consider purchasing power parity based GDP. United States has about $13,000 billion. China, with all their inflated numbers, is 6,500. 50% less GDP, equal amount of CO2 emissions. Has to be thoroughly bad coal and very bad efficiency, no matter which way you cut it. On this issue, I don't think energy policy following China is the way to go.
I'm just wondering just how important do you view this treaty as a possible solution?
In India, we have an oversensitivity. Part of my job as a provocative chair is to tickle that oversensitivity. We have an oversensitivity to China, because globally China gets a lot better press on virtually every except non-democracy human rights angle that one can think of. And I think that we need to challenge ourselves. My role and this initiative's role is to really act as a red group, is to make people like yourselves uncomfortable. Because even if we see exceptionalism in Indian industry as a result of Tata still being there and exerting some influence, we're not seeing that matched across the industry. Yeah? And that's why, I know that we've made the right partnering for this particular afternoon's discussion with Tata Sustainability. But I want to go beyond that and look at, where We know there are obvious challenges. We know that there are areas where we need to have massive efficiencies. Let's talk about our transportation sector, which is deplorable. It's now taken 10 years in Delhi for us to add an inch to the metro.
There are few industries in India. One of them is data. They don't care about whether there is a law or a policy or whatever it is. They don't believe in policy or what is mandatory or not mandatory. They go ahead with whatever they want to do, and they've done a great thing. Problem in India is, it is the middle scale, the medium scale, and the small scale industries, and illegal industries. We cannot compare with other countries, especially China, because ours is a very, very liberal democratic country of the world.
I think we have found two routes. One is the bigger players must try and work with their supply chain. Looking at CII membership, now that doesn't require any political will, but it definitely requires CEO will of all kinds of companies. Even if you eat a chocolate, the question is, where will you throw the wrapper? There is no more of the picnics kind of workshops on awareness. It's more of delivering of service. There are 3-day workshops in which companies can Monday morning action sort of start putting up the GRI.
Ecological refugees. I mean, we're not talking about them. All livelihood alternatives. Like we saw in the film that there are a lot of people who are cutting down the trees or mangroves because they don't have alternatives to livelihood. And the other thing is the awareness. Because if you notice, there was this a comment by a person in the film where he says, man is not responsible, it's the sea which is responsible.
Most of the time what we are doing is we're talking about global issues, and sometimes they become so generalized and vague that it is difficult to sort of tackle such issues. One is the industry initiative. If we see the balance sheets of most companies, they contain a chapter on environment. The other fact I felt was about urban planning. None of us talk about the fact how to reduce all this. And energy conservation in industry is not only significant, but it is also important in our own household. We are not prepared to change our habits. I mean, we must have everything best and preach about global warming. And that's what the problem is.
The films are just a starting point, I think. There's a lot more we need to do. The other point I want to make is we have very little time to actually act on it.
We assume, in a sense, a leadership role because we do the design engineering of the plants that come up, the industries that come up. So we have got a very serious role to play as far as the climate change goes. Actually, if you are aware, there were 6 working groups which were formed of the 6 countries that are there: China, Australia, Korea, Japan, USA. And these 6 groups are in the key core areas of mining, energy, clean coal technology, steel industry, aluminum, cement. And they are supposed to identify areas of where they can bring in higher efficiencies to reduce such emissions which can cause the climate change.
From CII, I'm sure that I think I have this cassette with me. We'll show the cassette to our members of the Environment and Conservation Committee. And whatever best I can do, I will request all the members of CII to contribute directly and indirectly to save this climate change.
A number of people have spoken about how companies can help each other. Having spent so long in the company of companies, I'm not sure the companies are quite at that stage where they're going to give their competitive edge away on a silver platter to other companies. I think it's best left to industry bodies, realistically, to perform that act of altruism. There's no reason why Tata should stop doing what it's doing to teach another 5 companies in Maharashtra. I'm not convinced that that sense of maturity has been reached by anyone.
Thank you very much. And Kosam, I want to continue on that theme just briefly, because as I've said, the reason that we've launched this nationwide initiative is because we want to improve the quality of debate that there is around environment issues, economic issues, and put climate change centre stage, not as an environmental issue, but very much as the issue which is going to enable us to live in harmony as a democracy or not. Everything that we know from the science, and I started off very much as a skeptic on these issues about 15 years ago. It's that long that I've been working on climate change issues. We are also launching Climate Challenge India clubs around the place. What it means is you're free to do so in whatever institution you wish, whether it's your workplace or whether it's a Rotary Club. We will provide you with resources to help you do that, intellectual, financial, so that you can go out there and make the change that you wish to. We'll be back here in Bombay in September. By that time, I want us already to have entered into a conversation with the BMC, because the BMC, the mayor of Bombay, was in New York from May the 16th to the 17th, participating in the city summit organized by the Clinton Foundation and the Climate Group. Now, I wonder whether the mayor has come back and shared any of that with the good people of Bombay and said, hey, listen, I'm now part of a leadership group and this is what we want to do. So we want to create platforms where people can, exert the right degree of pressure to get delivery from leaders who walk the talk but are not yet, talk the talk but are not yet ready to walk the talk. It just remains for me to thank you very much for staying to the bitter end and sharing your thoughts and your contributions with us. I very much want to thank Anand for being so ready to say, yes, CSM will happily partner you in beginning this conversation internally and externally around climate change. I want you to know that for us this is the beginnings of a relationship with each other. So we hope that you've all given us your contact details. Please feel free to come back to us at any point, and let's see what we can do together in the coming weeks and months.